Hello photographers, we are back here in Photoshop today to learn how to do some selective editing of the tone and color, not over the whole image but just in specific areas. Let's get started by opening up the Onion file that we just previously finished working on. So you can either click on the Home button or you can go up to File, Open, however you want to do it. You can click on the Open key here, but I want you to locate that Onions photo that we just got done working on. All right, we need to save a copy of this because I don't want to start making edits because it's going to auto save it into the cloud. So let's go to File, Save As. We're going to save it in the cloud, in Edited Photos folder, but this time let's take off the onions and let's call this Spot Corrections with your name and click Save. Okay, so last time we fixed the tone and the color on this, and it's a pretty good image, but right now it's lacking decent figure ground. We don't have a center of interest. All of the onions are kind of all on the same level, and we're going to fix that. We're going to highlight this grouping and this onion here by fixing the tone and color in just those specific areas. So we're looking for a drawer of tools over here in our toolbox. Your toolbox can be either single column or double column, doesn't matter which, and we're looking for this drawer right here. It should have 3 tools in it: Dodge, Burn, and Sponge. And we always start top down, typically speaking. The first two, Dodge and Burn, both have to do with your tone. That's your darks and lights. The Sponge tool has to do with your color. We're going to start first with the Dodge tool, so select your Dodge tool. This is our options bar at the top. I want you to set these preferences as is, but you're going to learn better control of them just as you open up images and get more familiar with the tool. So this drop down here, it has to deal with the size and the shape of the brush. When you're using these 3 tools, you're always going to want a soft, blurry brush, and you're going to want a brush that's slightly bigger than maybe what you think you need it to be because of the blurred edges. It's going to soften that. So you want it to be fairly big for the area that you're going to highlight, but not overly large, if that makes sense. It'll make more sense as we go through. The range has to do with what is it that you're lightening. So the Dodge tool lightens. So if I set this to shadows and I paint, it's going to lift the shadows. It's going to make the shadows lighter, or it's going to make the midtones lighter, or it's going to make the highlights lighter. Typically speaking, it's the highlights that you're trying to lift and make them lighter. So we're going to set this on highlights. And then I want you to set the exposure to 5. You always want to start low because you want to do several brushes across. You can always go brighter if you need to, but if you have your exposure set too high, it's going to lift it way too fast. Okay? So now we're going to come over to our image, and we're just going to paint. We're going to paint over top of those 3 onions there and over here. So stop the video, try that now. I'm going to go back to my before. See, am I making this before better or worse? So this is my before, this is my after. Now if I think it's too bright, I can go back, take my exposure down even more. Like I'm going to take it down 3%, and then I'm going to brush across and make my values just a little bit brighter. Again, I can see before, click on that after in my history panel. All right, so stop that and lighten your highlights on these 3 onions and this one here. All right, I want to show you highlighting of the midtones. I just want you to watch this. I'm not going to make you do it today unless you want to. Let's say that I wanted to actually lighten the midtones here as well. I would just switch that to midtones. I would come across, and it's going to make the gray areas or those middle values a little bit lighter. So you can do that last edit if you want to. All right, there's still not enough figure ground contrast for me. They're still getting kind of swallowed up by the other onions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to my shadows tool, which is my burn tool. Burn is going to darken, so grab your burn tool. Again, we want a brush that's a little bit bigger than I think I'm going to need. I want to make sure I have a soft brush. I want to set this to my shadows. Okay, so if the burn tool, we're always trying to increase the brights of the highlights typically. Burn tool, you're trying to darken the shadows. We're dealing with that figure ground. Let's leave the exposure set to 5%, and then we're going to brush across where the shadows are, around those 3 onions, and around this one here. Remember, you can brush around as many times as you want. Every time you click and drag, it's going to make it a little bit darker. All right, excellent. Let's see what that looks like. Let's go back at our history panel before our first burn tool click. That's what it looked like before, and that's what it looked like after. Excellent. The last tool in the drawer is our sponge tool. Dodge and burn tools both deal with value, lights and darks. Your sponge tool deals with the intensity of the color. So we're going to make the color on these just a little bit brighter, a little bit more noticeable than the other onions. So it works just the same. We've got the same commands up here. Instead of exposure, they call it flow. In my experience, the saturation, the sponge tool works really quickly, so you're going to want a low flow. So I'm going to go down to 5%. And you want to make sure that for mode you have it set to saturate. That means it's going to bump up the color. If I take desaturate, it's actually going to remove some of the color, but we're going to go to saturate. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. I'm showing you a shortcut here today. It may or may not work. It's working today. If you use your bracket keys, that's the little, almost look like little claw hands. The right bracket key on your keyboard makes the brush bigger, the left makes it smaller. So go ahead and find an appropriate shape and size for your sponge tool, and we're just going to brush across this onion here and our 3 onions here. And then again, I can go back to before, so I'm going to go back to my last burn tool. That's before, that's after. That's before, that's after. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the desaturate option just because we have some time, and I'm going to show you how you can use the desaturate to aid in your emphasis as well. So up here at the top, let's set that to desaturate. And in the onions that are just around it, I'm just going to brush across it a little bit, remove some of the color on the other onions. Because by removing their color, it's actually going to make the color on the onions I do want to stand out, make it look a little bit more noticeable without making them look artificial. Stop the video, try that now. All right, let's see how we did here. So I'm going to scroll my history panel all the way to the tippy top, and I'm going to click on the open. And see, this is before we started our edits today. This is after. Notice how we've now emphasized those areas. These 3 tools, Dodge, Burn, and Sponge, are great tools when aiding the figure ground aspect of your photo, making your center of interest really pop and stand out. When you are done with this and you are happy with this, remember to share this with me up here in the right, and you are done with your spot corrections video. Good job.